A few years ago, I was promoted to a management position within the software company I work for. I was told I was hand-picked for the job, and though it was a big promotion, I would not receive a pay increase until I had the team performing at minimum required performance standards. 2 years in, I had the team running the best numbers it had ever seen, far exceeding the minimum standards. Every quarter, I asked to be reviewed for a raise, and every quarter a reason was found to skip the review. Finally, I brought HR into the mix because I'm going to nail this because I'm busting my tail over here. Miraculously, a date was set for the end of the month. Funny how that works out. Alas, a week before my review date, where I would surely be granted my rate increase, my direct supervisor, a micromanaging weasel of a man, and the CEO of the company rewrote the minimum requirements to just barely exceed my team's current projected stats. When I came to him, fists clenched, he explained this move as an unrelated adjustment to compensate for improved average performance. Totally legit. Of course, with this change in place a week later, he took the opportunity with the HR director in attendance to express his deep and profound disappointment with my performance and to warn me that he expected me to go the extra mile next quarter or face disciplinary action since my team had failed to make the new grade. I was angry. So angry. I wanted to complain, but hey, it's the CEO. Who am I going to complain to? He knew that too and sneered at me any time he could. That's why I worked even harder, neglected my family and personal health, and worked to drive my team to their limits. We really made it too. I was going to show that idiot he couldn't win. Unless he cheated. When it became apparent that he was going to be forced to eat the pile of garbage he shoveled to me in the previous meeting with HR in attendance, he called me into a meeting to design a training handout for the team. We bounced ideas back and forth, but something was weird. Every time I tried to assign a task to someone or set a due date on the handout, the CEO dodged it. By the end of the meeting, we had accomplished nothing solid, and he tabled the assignment for a later date. Because it was tabled, and I assumed we would reschedule a follow-up, I filed my notes away and moved on with other work. A month after that planning meeting, I was pulled into HR and written up for failing to issue the training handout we had tabled. The CEO was in attendance and brought his personally typed meeting notes clearly outlining that I was assigned the task that day. I had no recourse. He was lying. I said as much and was treated like a combative child. He acted insulted and incredulous. By the end, I was sent home for the day with a demotion off of the team I had built and worked so hard for. I still don't know why the CEO had it out for me. He hired an assistant manager who had been sucking up to him for the longest time to replace me and told everyone he could how bad I did in that position. I'll never be chosen for something like that again because this guy decided he didn't like me. That's it. No revenge, no justice. The bad guy wins. Maybe one day he'll die in a fiery car crash. One can only hope.
My co-workers often talk of the incident that occurred about a year before I started working my job. Apparently, one sweltering, blistering, humid day, an obese woman entered the shop to order some food. The industrial ovens were working full blast, and as there is no AC in the building, everyone was already understandably miserable. The obese woman apparently had poor hygiene and immediately filled the small shop with the heinous mixed scents of armpit sweat and stank butt. My unhappy co-workers hurried to finish her order so she would leave. They had just placed her sandwich in the oven when the woman began to fidget. She lumbered to her feet, started to speak, then changed her mind and sat back down. She squirmed about. A couple moments later, she stood again and rushed out of the shop without her food. After the initial confusion, my co-workers were horrified to discover that she had left a greasy puddle of diarrhea on the bench and floor. The smell was reportedly horrible. One co-worker, pregnant at the time, rushed out, gagging. The other two, after a few minutes of silent horror, pulled on gloves and carried the bench out to the back alley, where they attempted to hose it down. May I mention that the bench was wooden, old, and chipped, and that it seemed to have absorbed the greasy poop with joy? Yes, it was unsalvageable, and it reportedly stunk up the entire alley until it was taken out with the other garbage 3 days later. Even after mopping and bleaching the floor below the bench, the entire shop smelled so terrible they had to close up for the rest of the day. I hear the shop owner gave them all an extra $20 in their paychecks when he heard what had happened.
I used to work at a place that attracted oddballs, but there was one guy who was particularly strange. When he was hired, he seemed like an odd, but ultimately likable guy. He had some habits which were a bit odd. Half-hour toilet breaks, some strange tics, but it was a relaxed company. He got the work done, and he worked later than everyone else, so no one minded. Anyway, office life went on. Seasons passed, and people lived. A couple of months later, one day, one of the secretaries came in and started complaining. She couldn't find one of her high heels, which she kept under her desk. We all had a quick look, but she was quite ditzy, so we assumed that she had just lost it. Then, a few days later, another lady lost her jacket. Then another lost her dress shirt she kept in one of the lockers. Stuff started to go missing. By this point, we all knew something was going on, but we couldn't figure out what, or more specifically, who was taking all these items of women's clothes. One day, a few weeks after stuff started going missing, I was leaving the pub after some after-work beers and realized I'd left my house keys on my desk. No bother. Pub is literally under the office, so I popped up to grab them. On the way, the one too many beers crept up in my bladder, so I decided to use the office toilets. While I'm there, I slam open the door in a half-intoxicated state, fully expecting it to be empty. It wasn't. In front of me, squeezed into various bits of my coworker's clothing and shoes, is the oddball in question, facing the mirror, furiously tearing the clothes off. I freeze. He freezes. I shout and run out, with this horrifying image in my head burning on my retinas. I immediately email my boss and hurry home. Never did grab my keys. Thank God for my then boyfriend. Gosh. Needless to say, we fired the man, with some people talking of pressing charges. The worst bit was he never cleared out his pedestal, so when we cracked it open, we were greeted with all the crusty clothes he'd gathered. We locked it and threw the whole thing out. Sometimes it's just not worth it.
I've told this one plenty, but nobody believes me. I used to work as a receptionist at a car dealership. Not a used car dealership, a fairly high-end brand. When I first started, we had an online sales manager named Chris. Chris was a complete douchebag and never really grew out of his college self. He was mid-30s and married, and still talked about hot girls and football all day. He also loved to hit on customers and had zero concern for the presence of a husband or boyfriend. There was a particular couple that had worked with Chris for years and had bought not only themselves cars from him, but their kids' cars too. They would often stop in just to say hello and to chat with him. I saw them come in together one day to talk to Chris briefly, and didn't see either of them again for about 7 or 8 months. I had no idea at the time that Chris was sleeping with the guy's wife and had been for a very long time. Fast forward about 7 to 8 months, the husband comes in at about 3 p.m. on a Friday. We're super busy. Keep in mind that I know nothing about these people's personal lives, so I had no idea what was about to happen or why it was a big issue that this guy was in the dealership. He came up to the front desk and asked me if he could talk to Chris. He was holding a ceramic jar of some sort. Not an urn or a pot, but a really weird jar, almost like it was made out of clay. I didn't bother to ask about it and told him that Chris wasn't here today, which was the truth. He seemed calm enough and said, "All right," and walked over to the showroom. To describe my view, the desk is dead center by the entrance. The showroom is attached to the lobby my desk is in with no wall in between, so I see everything perfectly. He walks in circles for a little bit, not really looking at any cars. He keeps walking towards Chris's office and turning around when he gets close to it. This goes on for maybe 20 minutes until out of nowhere, he goes up to Chris's office and slides a note under the door, walks out to the middle of the showroom, and opens the jar. He begins slowly pouring out the contents of the jar, which looked like dust or even gunpowder. He dumped them all over our showroom, and a few of the salesmen started to notice what was happening and just kind of stood and watched. He said nothing this entire time. Once he was done pouring out the jar, he kind of threw a fit. He threw the jar at the ground and started kicking the powder around, still not saying a single word. Our general manager eventually came out and grabbed him with the help of another salesman and escorted him out front and held him there, and I had to call the police and try to describe what just happened. The man stayed silent, with the exception of a few cusses the entire time. Turns out, the man's wife had passed away recently, and he found out after her death that she had cheated. He had her cremated and spread her ashes in our showroom. Chris never told any of us what was on the note.
Here's the big one. First level 1. IT help desk job, and day 1, they tell me there's a lock on the women's restroom door that requires you to tap your badge for entry. There's no lock on the men's though. The thought was that there were people coming from other floors in the building and trashing the women's bathroom. Odd but okay. Worked there around 2, very close to 3 years when it all came to a head. A co-worker, now my wife, hilariously, comes to me one day and notes that someone funked up the women's restroom. She wanted to nail down the culprit. No luck, but in her research, she noted the person didn't have shoes on. Like who pops their shoes off when taking a massive dump at work? She waits by the elevator and only sees one person leave from that area, but it seemed unlikely that person would be our mysterious Dookie the clown. Weird, but okay. A month passes and a different co-worker pulls me aside to tell me where the good bathroom in the building is. Should the women's restroom be destroyed again? I'm like, again? I bumped into my wife and she's nearly green. Turns out she went into the restroom and was nearly run over by a poor soul running out of the bathroom. Then she discovers, her words, I wasn't there, a keyboard-sized pile of crap on the floor. She dives out of there because, understandably, it smells horrid. She runs to the front desk to alert our office manager when the HR lady shows up. HR lady tells the same story. My wife steps aside to let the HR lady handle getting building services to the floor to address the necessary cleanup. But HR lady has diarrhea up her back. My wife is freaking out and trying to tell the office manager that the HR lady may know more than you'd think, but without HR lady finding out. Turns out, the culprit had likely always been the HR lady.
Back when I worked retail in college, I had this crazy-ass coworker. This girl was so slick and conniving that it was scary. I worked at a very small store, no more than 8 employees for context. I have literally never met anyone like her in my life. She was so sweet and we all loved her. I had no idea what she was really like. So one night when she was working the closing shift with the assistant manager, she literally stole $100 out of the deposit. My manager didn't notice at all. She said that they both were together the entire time that they were handling the money. There was no way she could have taken the money without her noticing. She literally went to the bank the next day, and they told her the deposit was short. It was a big thing, there was an investigation and such, etc. I pretty much knew my coworker had done it because there was no other logical explanation for how the money went missing. It also didn't help that the day before we discovered the money was missing, she claimed she was upset because she didn't have enough money to buy her boyfriend's birthday gift. Yet the next day, she comes into work and shows us a nice piece of jewelry she just bought for him that day. So at this job, we also had another coworker who would never put a lock on her locker. So crazy coworker came into work one day looking for a locker and opened up one she thought was empty since it had no lock on it. She saw there was a purse in it and proceeded to help herself and stole $40 out of our coworker's purse. It sucked, and my coworker was pretty upset, but of course we had no proof it was her. It also taught my other coworker a valuable lesson about locking up her stuff. So another time, this crazy coworker calls the job up on a Saturday, minutes before her shift, and claims she got into a big car accident and injured her hand. We felt so bad for her and were so concerned. She told us she was calling out and was going to the hospital to get it checked out. I guess she forgot that we were friends on Instagram because I saw pictures of her at some wild party that night, and she was just fine. So much for her hand. The final straw was when my boss found out that crazy coworker was literally stealing money out of the cash registers. She would wait until there were no employees or customers around and would ring up fraudulent returns and would pocket the cash that was supposed to be returned to the customer. She would sign the return slips and everything. I couldn't believe she has the audacity to do this and think she wouldn't get caught. It literally left a paper trail, LOL. Needless to say, once my boss finally had proof and this girl was gone.
Not directly my screw-up, but a mate was testing a new email server and realized that he could send emails that appeared to be authenticated as being from anyone in the organization. So of course, he sent one from the CEO to me saying, "You're sacked, you're the worst employee we've ever had." Only he mistyped my email address, so it bounced back. To the CEO. The CEO came to my desk looking worried, saying there appeared to have been some kind of hack and got the IT guys to take everything down while they investigated. My mate confessed to the director of IT, who had his back, never did let on what really happened.
I once took a whole television station off air during an exclusive interview, while my boss was stood behind me. I literally watched my finger move towards the button thinking, I don't think this is the right button to press. I was right. Channel falls off air. Viewers at home see color bars. Every single phone in the desk starts ringing as I scramble to get things fixed. While through talk back I hear, "Who the heck did that?" I had to puck up every phone and say, "It was me, sorry." Felt like an idiot. Oh, and I also gave away an entire week's takings, thousands, to a customer. I basically worked at a really dodgy furniture shop where the owner never used to put the takings to the bank. Instead, they would hide them in the various chests and wardrobes we sold, and not tell us. This particular day, she hid 5,000 in a chest in the customer collection area without telling us. Dude comes in to pick up chest. I give him chest. 2 hours later, she asks, "Where is the chest with all the cash in?" Luckily, the guy was honest and bought it back. It was pre-internet days, and we kept no record of sales. Like I said, it was a very scammy run business. Can't say I felt particularly guilty about that one as, let's be honest, it was a stupid thing to do. Everyone makes mistakes. It's how you admit to it and put it right that matters.
I worked for a company that employed extremely fit, healthy, and ethically minded employees. One day, HR brought in cupcakes from a local bakery. Even with me eating one every hour, there were still cupcakes left over at the end of the day. Never seen that before in my life, don't expect to ever again.
I found what I thought was a USB slot underneath the till in the corner shop. It had a little red cover on it. I thought it was interesting, so I poked it 3 times to see if I could see inside. 5 minutes later, a policeman joined the queue and asked how I was doing, and I was surprised when he just walked off without buying anything. Turns out it was the armed robbery alarm button I'd pressed, and had it have been in a city, there'd probably have been 4 armed police responding rather than a single dude with a truncheon. Mercifully, the duty manager didn't find out until the next day when they got a letter from the police about time wasters, and I wasn't in to get disciplined by them, but my coworkers found it hilarious.
I was updating some users in a database on a production system, which you should never do, and accidentally deleted everybody. This crashed the site when someone tried to do anything on it, booted them out, and left them unable to get back in. Luckily, I had a backup and managed to reinstate the table within a couple of minutes. The users were pretty spread out geographically, so they won't have noticed a pattern of crashing and probably wrote it off as a one-off local blip. I didn't see tickets raised, but I got away with it nonetheless.
At my old job, a cat was living in our office for weeks, without anyone realizing. It would hide behind a fridge during the day and then come out at night when we were gone and knock stuff over and eat any food that was left out. Eventually, one of my colleagues named the cat Sneaker and got her microchipped after pulling the cat from on top of a microwave where someone had left a can of mackerel for a few minutes. The cat didn't belong to anybody, so the colleague took her home, and now they sleep next to each other and are very much in love.